we're going to begin because we want to make sure we get through before it rains, if it does rain today. And I hope it doesn't rain during our next hour or 45 minutes. So before I introduce myself, let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to do today. Then I'll introduce myself and then we'll start the program. So this tour is a walking tour. We are obviously starting here with our first site. We're going to walk down to Merritt and Church Street, the corner, as our second stop, and then we're going to end up at the diner parking lot. And I hope that this will be about 45 for this event today. I'm really happy if people participate. If you have questions or memories, that's really great to throw them out and we can discuss them. Interacting is really good, and I encourage that too in all my classes. So I encourage you all today to, if you have things to say, to interact. I'm going to ask you some questions at the end of our tour, so pay attention if you want to get a good grade, because that will be important also. And what? Oh, and so something else, you know, I don't think I have to worry with this group, but put your cell phones away. Well, I might have to worry with one or two people. Because you can live without a cell phone for 45 minutes, right, or an hour, so we'll do that. My name is Wayne Lempka, and this is my second program that I've done for the Historical Society. I did one last summer also. I'll tell you a little bit about me. I'm an art historian, a college professor, and a museum professional, and I've spent most of my career teaching and doing museum work. I've also done a lot of tours in my life. I'm going to tell you, some of you who were here last year for my talk, you're going to repeat some of the things that I told you, but some of the well-known people that I gave tours to were King Carlos and Queen Sylvia of Sweden. I gave them a tour of the highlights of the Storm King Art Center, which is the leading sculpture museum in America, and they were really wonderful people, and it was really low-keyed, and I was really nervous before the talk, but everything turned out really great. I've given a tour to U.S. Congressman Maurice Hinchey of 19th century Hudson River School paintings. I gave a tour of highlights of a permanent collection to Governor Kathy Hochul when she was Lieutenant Governor, and I have to say that her Secret Service were more interested in what I was saying than she was, because she was really interested in just photo opportunities. So, but anyway, at the end of today, I'm going to add all of you onto my list of famous people that I've given. I've also given tours to Americans in Rome and in Paris. And when I was living in England, I gave the 7 p.m. candlelight tour of Canterbury Cathedral. And it wasn't really candlelight, but they called it that. So, but it was really quite interesting. So today we're going to begin, and I've titled my talk based on Joni Mitchell's 1970 song. Some of you might remember that. It was called The Big Yellow Taxi. And it basically talked about they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. And in 1970, she was talking about urban renewal. And urban renewal in America was very controversial, as you can imagine. And Millbrook suffered from urban renewal also, because not only are the 3 buildings that we're going to talk about today part of urban renewal, but also there are other buildings in Millbrook that fell to the wrecking ball also. But that's for another time and another talk. So before we look at our first building, which is on this site, I want to just read you what part of her lyrics. She sings, "They paved paradise, they put up a parking lot with a pink hotel, a boutique, and a swinging night spot." Well, we don't have those in Millbrook, but don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. So again, that was a real 70s theme, and here's her music also. And there she is in 1970. I just saw a picture of her yesterday on the internet, and I can't believe it's the same person. She really looks old, but you know, we do age, right? But anyway, a young folk singer in 1970. But I think to understand urban renewal, we have to look at what was happening in America in the 1940s and 1950s. After World War II, Americans became a lot more prosperous. It was very common for middle-class families from, say, 1950 on. Most middle-class families had 2 cars. Roadways after World War II were improving. New roadways were being constructed. Americans were able to travel quite a bit on highways, and so towns like Millbrook realized that in order to encourage visitors and encourage commerce, they needed to cater to the people who came into the village. And where do they park? Well, Main Street and the side streets were limited, but were they really limited? And that's a question we have to think about. So many buildings, like I said, fell to the wrecking ball in the quest of providing parking for the increase in traffic cars that Americans had in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s. Now, I don't know about you, I live not too far up here on Maple Avenue, and I'm very guilty of taking my car down to Reardon and Briggs or the post office and then taking it back home. But, you know, and of course when I go down, I want to park really close. Or I want to park in a parking lot. But now I've changed that. So I do walk, and I encourage you, if you live close by, to walk everywhere that you go to. Also, another thing that happened is women became drivers, and that wasn't always the case, but in the 1950s we see a really big increase in women getting their license and driving cars. So that also added to the fact that there were a lot more cars, and of course that stereotypic view that women would go out shopping, they needed parking close to where they were going. So this is the premise for why many of these buildings were taken down. So we are on the site of the former Knights of Columbus Hall. Let me just turn this around. And this is one of the buildings, obviously, that fell to urban renewal. And so, some really great photographs of this building. Now, I remember this building growing up because the Merritt Avenue kids, we would always hang out here because it was a really interesting and kind of scary building because it was built in the American Gothic style, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. But it was an incredible building. It originally was built for the Quakers. And the Quakers built this in the late 1800s for their meeting house. It had one main room. It had a balcony for, I guess, a choir, and it had a porte-cochere, which was right here. And this was the Quakers' meeting house, or place where they had service, until 1927, when they were swallowed up or became part of the Lyle Memorial Federated Church, which is right up here on the corner. So in 1927, this really wonderful American Gothic building was sold to St. Joseph's Church and the Knights of Columbus. And the Knights of Columbus was an organization that was started for Catholic men because Catholic men could not join the Masons. And Mrs. Lempka, can Catholic men still join the Masons today?
Not supposed to.
Not supposed to, right. So the Knights of Columbus was established for Catholic men so they could have a fraternal organization like the Masons. And they had different hierarchies and whatever, and this became their meeting.
I mean, car's trying to get out.
Huh?
Are they okay?
They're okay, but they don't think
That would be me.
No, they're fine. So anyway, this was where they met. They also had dinners here. And here's a picture of a dinner that was hosted on the 50th anniversary of the St. Joseph Knights of Columbus. There were some very well-known people here, including George T. Whalen I, and again, he was the founder of the Whalen dynasty, and he's sitting here at the head table. You could have weddings here. They had religious classes for Catholic teenagers because there were no Catholic high schools at that time or elementary school, so you would have release time and you would come to the Knights of Columbus Hall to have religious instruction.
Excuse me, what year was that?
What do you mean? When they had religious instruction?
Yeah.
This was in the 1950s,
right?
these folks, or 40s, 1940s. But
when did they get a Catholic school? When did they get a Catholic school?
The Catholic school was built, I think it opened in 1959. And that was one of the reasons why this building was abandoned, because when St. Joseph's built their Catholic school, and I think it opened in 1959 or 1960, it was a much more modern meeting place for the Knights of Columbus, because it had a big modern auditorium, it had a commercial kitchen, So this building, which not a lot of work was ever done to it, was sort of beginning to fall into disrepair, but not really. But of course you're going to go from an old building and when you have the opportunity to go to a new building. So the Knights of Columbus moved out of this building about 1960 or so, 1959. The building sat empty. The building sat empty for many years. And it was actually, it was torn down, I believe in 1966, is when it was torn down. Mary Flagler Carey from Carey Arboretum bought the property. I believe she had it torn down. You know, we never have motorcycles in Millbrook until we have a dog, right? And then we have So Mrs. Flagler Carey bought this building. I believe from the records she had it torn down, and then the Millbrook Library bought the building for a parking lot. So here they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. But the building is really kind of wonderful.
Wait, did she have it torn down or did the library have it
No,
torn down?
she had it torn down.
Oh.
And then she sold the property to the library.
It was used for quite a few years by Millbrook Central School District for kindergarten.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. When I was in kindergarten, students with the names from A to L went to kindergarten across the road in
Well, that's
Village Hall,
interesting.
and
Okay.
M to Z were educated
Oh,
here.
okay. So it had multiple, that's good.
Yeah.
Multiple
How long
uses.
did they do
Yeah,
that?
when was that?
I don't know how long.
Yeah.
50s, mid-50s?
Probably
must
until they
have
built the
rented it or
kindergarten, which I think they built probably in, again, 1960s,
I
maybe?
went to kindergarten over here
Yeah, I
in
did too.
1960.
Yeah, probably. So that was new. Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, at the Village Hall, I went.
Oh, you went to
I
the
had
Village
seen
Hall
them,
too? Oh, interesting. Okay, didn't realize that. So I want to talk a little bit about the architectural style of this building. It's called American Carpenter Gothic because it's based on the Gothic designs of from the 17th century in Europe, the stone buildings. And these buildings, and again, these wooden structures, repeated the same kind of ideas that the traditional stone Gothic churches had. You had the pointed windows, you had a high peaked arch.
Wait, can you move that back a little bit? Can you move it back, the
Oh,
easel,
yeah.
please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Good.
Yeah,
You
I
all
mean,
can move over here.
But everybody, I know. It's hard to see. Yeah, we
So-
want to stay on the shape.
So there's specific architectural details that make it American Gothic. Also, it was the use of the clapboards. Now, this building had clapboards that went horizontally, but also it had the typical vertical clapboards, which was supposed to raise your eyes up, perhaps, to heaven, because these designs were based on, like I said, the European Gothic cathedral architecture, but done in wood, not in stone. A lot of American purists, architect historians especially, they did not like the American Carpenter Gothic. They thought it was too kind of folksy. They thought it was too it wasn't beautiful enough. So they actually were very much against this sort of style. And I have a very famous painting here. Does anyone know who did this and what the title is?
American Gothic.
American Gothic by anyone know?
Grant Wood.
Grant Wood, very good. So again, this is the kind of thoughts that the architectural historians had, who were, you know, a little had different ideas. They thought that this American Gothic, and you can see the style is right behind her, and he names it after the building. They thought it was just too Midwestern, too farmer-like. It wasn't really what Americans should pattern their architecture after. But it was really a great building, and again, living up on Merritt Avenue, the Merritt Avenue kids would always be down here, you know, playing in the lot, in the field. And it was always a very mysterious building because we wanted to go in, but we could never get inside. So, but you know, you think about what could this building be used for today if it was still standing. It could be used for so many things. But again, you know, the town fathers, I guess, decided that, you know, we needed parking. So is one of the buildings that did fall to the wrecking ball, but a really great structure, and I think it's one of my favorite lost buildings in Millbrook, especially with the porte-cochere here, which was actually the passageway for carriages as opposed to a portico, which is really just a covering for someone walking into a building. This was built in the late 1800s. I think it was like 1870 perhaps. Looking at the Sanborn maps, I think we thought it was maybe around 1870 or something like that. The building was there. I mean, it wasn't there, then it was there, so.
Is it possible to know, so did Mary Flagler Carey buy it with the intention of turning it over to the library? Or?
She did, yeah. She bought it for the library, yeah. And if you think about it, her great-grandfather's portrait hangs over the fireplace in the library, so there's all that connection. So there was like a lot of talk going on behind the scenes, like let's buy the building, let's tear it down, let's make a parking lot.
It seems like she possibly could have donated it. She certainly could have afforded to.
Oh yeah, and she probably did. Yeah, and those details I don't know, but they're out there to be discovered. So any questions?
Which way did it say? Whereabouts was it in the middle?
It was about, well, it was about right over, probably about right over here.
Okay.
Because it wasn't that far from the sidewalk. And I remember too, like every Christmas, the Merritt Avenue kids knew Christmas was coming because the Knights of Columbus would set up a manger right over here in the corner, and that was always a big excitement for the Merritt Avenue kids. When you're young, those sort of things are really exciting. Any other questions? No cell phones, right.
We're actually outside.
Exactly. Okay, so we're going to walk down. We're going to go down Merritt Avenue, and we're going to, or if you're going to drive and park, you can park in the parking lot. We're going to go down to the corner of Merritt and Church Street for our next stop. All right. Tour. We have music. We have hidden things. We have many things. Read it aloud.
Well, aren't you waiting for Judith from the newspaper?
Oh no, she's gonna meet us over at the last stop.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she couldn't.
Comes Jonathan with the tripod.
So our second stop today is where the original Grange Hall stood, and this stood here for many years until about 1968. Again, does anyone know what kind of style this was?
Was it?
What kind of style, architectural style we're looking at? Does anyone know? You can come closer too, if you want. You can see, you know, it's good. I always encourage everyone to come close though, because you know we're all friends and we can see better. Anyone know what style this is?
No.
Yes, church.
It's a church. It's the American Gothic style, right? How do we know that? Again, the pointed windows, the high archways here. Again, built in the same style as the Knights of Columbus Hall that we just were at. This is a really interesting building in many respects. Its history. This was the original Grace Church, and obviously this was built here, and we have the name Church Street. Because there was another church up on the other end of the street. But this was the original Grace Church. I mean, this was the second Grace Church. The first Grace Church was in Harts Village. It burned down in 1870. It was an arson attack. And then the fathers of the church decided that they were going to move the church to the village because things were beginning to happen in the village in the 1870s. We had the railroad. So this was the second Grace Church. And Isaac Merritt gave the land for this church, and the church was built in 1893. It cost $6,000 to build the church. They had $3,000 in donations, and they had $3,000 from their insurance. So can you imagine building a building for $6,000? And again, this was the second church until in 1901, Morgan Wing, who owned the Wing Estate where the condominiums are up here on the corner, he decided after a trip to England that he wanted the Grace Church to look more like an English country church. So he donated some of his land, and he actually paid, I believe they say, for most of the construction of that very beautiful stone church that we have up on the corner of Franklin Avenue. So in 1901, 1902, the Grace Church moved to its permanent location. The church sat empty for a while, and then in the 1920s, the New York State Grange, the Millbrook division, bought this building. The Grange was an organization that was to help promote community values, and there are still a number of Granges around today. I believe there's one in Stanfordville. But they were to promote the betterment of the community. So they would have their meetings here. They would have social events, they would have dances, they would have parties, they had movies here, they had concerts. Again, it was a really early arts center before we even had the concept of an arts center. So again, if you can imagine, maybe this could have been Millbrook Arts Center if the building was still standing.
Wasn't there a theater in town?
Yes.
Yeah, there was a theater in town. Yeah.
Washington, where, well, the Agway, I don't know.
Yeah, where the Agway.
Oh, really?
used to
Go back
be. Yeah,
there?
that was the, and it was run by Pickles.
Oh, Pickles. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a long story, Pickles. Anyway.
Well, I thought, and Mimi said she could watch them over here, the movies.
Yeah, they had movies here too, and actually my second cousin would play the piano in the Grange when they had the silent movies inside. So, and I just found that out recently from one of my cousins. So that was kind of true. Yeah, so they had movies inside here too. It was a gathering place for the community.
So Wayne, I missed where the actual church was built. Is it?
It was right here. We're standing right on the spot.
I thought you said it was moved here.
The
No?
Grace Church.
No, the Grace Church was where
So
the church moved.
it's here.
Right. I thought you said before that.
Oh, the first church, I'm sorry, the first church was in Harts Village. That's the one that burned down by arson.
Where's the Arts Village?
Harts Village is near
You missed the last talk. Ashley's talk.
the Shunpike, you know,
Oh,
when you're
yeah, yeah.
going
Sharon-
like to the
Sharon
winery.
Turnpike.
Yeah,
Sharon Turnpike.
Sharon Turnpike.
Much closer than that.
Yeah, closer than each
You
other.
know, I don't know where it was there. Does anyone know where that was, Bill?
What's that?
Where the original Grace Church was?
It was by right, like where Rodrigo Knowles is.
Oh, right around
that
there.
area, kind of down
Oh,
there.
okay.
Yeah.
On the south side.
I thought the grain, I don't mean, I always thought the grain was associated with farmers.
Yeah, and they did a lot with farmers.
Oh,
For sure. Oh, definitely. But they, you know, they were a multi-purpose organization in the beginning. You know, again, like I said, helping for the betterment of the community to help improve people's lives, and they did a lot of different activities like that. So again, this is again constructed in the American Gothic carpenter style because it uses wood. It has the pointed windows. It was built in an L shape, as you can see here. And I want to read you a little bit about the description, because the person who wrote this gives a much better description than I could, and this is based on seeing the inside. So the inside of this building, it had an arched ceiling with pointed windows, which gave a Gothic atmosphere. It had some peculiar arches, a pair of arches that delineated the sanctuary area. The ceiling was painted blue. The walls were gray, again contributing to the feeling of an old world stone church. The interior woodwork was solid oiled chestnut. The furnishings were made of walnut. The side windows were richly and beautifully colored with appropriate symbols and emblems. And there were two other windows that were given, one in memory of the soldiers killed in the Civil War, which I thought was really interesting, like where did those windows go? And the other was a memorial given by Franklin Merritt, again, the founder, as we know, of Millbrook, in honor, in memory of him. So it must have been quite a beautiful interior in its heyday. And again, it was originally, like I said, used as the Grace Church's first place. And the picture of my Uncle Joe, Joe Sotero, some of you might remember him. He's standing actually right over there, facing the building. Joe lived here with his family, and you can see the Grace Church, the Grange in the background, and there he is. And I have a picture of my cousin Karen Sotero. And I have a picture of her, and I'm going to take this off now, because my cousin, I'm going to read you this because you probably can't see this. This is from the Millbrook Roundtable on July 2nd, 1970. It says, the title was, High School Valedictorian Takes Town Fathers to Task. Many attendees to the Saturday high school graduation ceremony had their feathers ruffled when class of 1970 valedictorian Karen Sotero gave her speech. Expecting a typical valedictorian speech which encouraged graduates to go on and change the world, Ms. Sotero's remarks criticized the town fathers for tearing down dilapidated buildings. Well, they had to add dilapidated because they really weren't. Criticized the town fathers for tearing down dilapidated buildings in the village and replacing them with parking lots. And this was 1970. Joni Mitchell's song came out in April, and this was in June, so obviously she was very much inspired by Joni Mitchell's song. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. She also presented anti-Vietnam War sentiments and praised the 1969 Woodstock Music Festival. So it was quite a different valedictorian speech, and I remember going there as, and sitting there as a fairly young
go
child.
over these speeches first?
Huh?
I was supposed to go over these speeches first.
Maybe now they do.
Well, they do. And
After
that was
that
a
they
big,
did.
and that was a big question that people had when they, because then they published her speech the next week in the roundtable, and that caused so many people to write letters to the editor because they were like, how could she say this? How could she have done this? And that was a big question that this article, and this is only part of it, this article asked, like, was her speech vented by anybody? You know, did someone read this before? Because obviously if someone had read it before, they would not have allowed her probably to give the speech. Well, it was read by her Spanish professor, Mr. Fernandez. Do you remember him? Yeah, I had him for 4 years. He was quite different, and he would have approved or encouraged something like this. I don't know if he got in trouble, but anyway, today you write a valedictorian or a salutatorian speech, it has to be certainly vetted before you give it. But this was big Millbrook controversy in history at the time. So.
Better to ask forgiveness than permission.
Yeah. So anyway, it all relates to they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Because again, like the Knights of Columbus Hall that we just looked at, wouldn't have this been a great art center or something to a community building for the community to use? And, but again, the concept was we need parking, and here we are standing in the parking lot with cars. We need parking more than we need historic buildings. So the second building that fell to the wrecking ball. Any questions? Does anyone remember this building going inside?
Yeah, we had.
Yeah. Did you go to events here? Do you remember?
No, I just remember the outside.
Yeah, I always wanted to go inside. I had never gone inside this building. It was always locked up. And the Bank of Millbrook, is that correct, Peter?
I was going to say Brad Roller and I received our Eagle badges, Eagle Scout badges at dinner.
Oh, did
that
you?
A lady named Grace Briggs put on all the Grange dinners for
really
various
great.
groups there. So
Yeah, that was great.
yeah.
So the Millbrook, Bank of Millbrook, I believe, bought this building in 1968, and they tore it down because Millbrook needed a parking lot. And again, my cousin, who lived right next door, witnessed the destruction of this building that had always been here, as long as the Sotero family lived in that house.
Wait, is that where she lived?
Yeah, that's where she lived. Yeah. This was the Sotero family home, and my Uncle Joe took it over
There's
when...
a lot of Soteros, though. I don't know. I didn't know where she lived.
Yeah, she lived right there.
And they had a restaurant here at one point.
Yeah, they
right?
had many things. That was last year's talk.
So was she Joe Sotero's daughter?
Yeah, this is Joe Sotero's daughter.
daughter.
And there's Joe Sotero as a young man.
Joe used to cut my hair.
Yeah, he was a popular,
there.
popular barber.
You did?
So, again, 1968, the building fell to the wrecking ball because, again, Millbrook needed parking. So I want you to think about that because in our last stop when we're done there, I'm going to ask you a few questions and sort of get some of your opinions on, these ideas of just taking down buildings for parking lots.
Think of all that.
Our last stop today, it's funny, I was talking to someone at one of the coffee shops in Millbrook a few weeks ago, and I was telling them I was doing a tour of the lost buildings in Millbrook, and I was telling them where we were going, and he's not from Millbrook, and he said, "Oh, I thought there were always parking lots there. I had no concept that there were buildings anywhere where we have parking lots today." So I said, "No, come to my tour, fun." Anyway, our last stop is Mrs. Moore's Hat Shop. Does anyone remember Mrs. Moore's Hat Shop? This has a really interesting history. I'll tell you a little bit about who Mrs. Moore was. And I have a photograph of her right here. There was a really kind of interesting building that's right in this spot that we're standing, where the Moores lived in the house, and then they added this addition for the hat shop. Mrs. Moore, she grew up outside of Millbrook. She was number 11 of, I believe, 13 children. She came from a big family. At the age of 16, she went to Pratt Institute in New York, in Brooklyn, and actually that's where I took my undergraduate, to study fashion design. And she took a one-year program at Pratt in fashion design. Then she decided that she was more interested in doing millinery work. So after she graduated at the age of 17, she worked at Stern Brothers on 24th Street, West 24th Street in Manhattan. And she worked in the millinery shop there for 2 years. She made hats, and she really excelled at that. She had a boyfriend, Harry Moore, who was a grocer in Millbrook, and I don't know where his grocery store was. Does anyone know?
How did you meet him?
Well, that I'm not sure either. That's a whole nother bit of history. But anyway, she met him somehow. Maybe she knew him because they were she was kind of from the area, I don't know. But in 1901, she married Perry Moore in St. Joseph's Church. They bought the house here in 1901. And then in 1902, they had $60,000. Now that's like, where did they get $60,000 in 1902? But they had $60,000 that they decided to purchase supplies and open up a hat shop in their living room of the house, which sat right here. So this is where Mrs. Moore's hat shop began, in her living room. It became so successful that after 5 years, they decided to build the addition onto the building, which was actually right over here, was where you entered into Mrs. Moore's hat shop. At that time, in 1907, she had 4 assistants working for her. Mrs. Moore's hat shop was a place to see and be seen for local women, because not only did they have one-of-a-kind hats designed by Mrs. Moore, but she would periodically go to New York and buy the latest fashion and bring them back to Millbrook. So for middle-class and upper-class women, this was the place to be. Besides selling hats, she also sold costume jewelry and other odds and ends. But her biggest contribution was to designing and making hats for the local women. And like I said, this was a place that everyone went. I remember, again, as a young boy, going here with my mother when it was still open. It was very strange inside, from what I remember. It was one big showroom, but she just had long wooden tables with stands where she had hats sitting on them. And it was kind of an eerie, weird sort of look inside, but I guess people didn't care about the eerie, weird look because they were more concerned about the beautiful hats that she sold. So she worked here for 60 years. This is pretty amazing. She closed her business in, I believe, 1968. So she was here for 60 years selling hats. But of course, you know, we have to think about how American culture changed during that time. In the early 19th century, in the 1920s up to the 1950s, women always covered their heads when they went outside. So of course you wanted the latest hat. Of course you wanted to look your best when you went down the street, you went downtown, you went shopping, you went to church. But again, in the 1960s, not only did we have urban renewal, but we had a change in styles and in fashions. Hollywood stars, especially women, no longer wore hats. Hairstyles changed. Men no longer wore hats. Women no longer wore gloves in the 1960s. So places like Mrs. Moore's hat shop was pretty much doomed. And at the end of 1968, she closed her shop because there really wasn't much business at all, although it was a home business. So I have the outsides of the building. I have an advertisement that appears in the Millbrook Round Table, and it says, "And now it's fall, the new felt in all bright, warm shades have arrived, novelties in scarves and jewelry at Marist Hat Shop." Originally, this was called T.H. Moore. And originally, it wasn't Moore's Hat Shop, it was Harry Moore's Hat Shop, her husband. But at some point, they changed it to Mrs. Moore's Hat Shop. And here's a very early advertisement that I found in the archives of the Historical Society. It was the opening of P.T. Moore's, Harry T. Moore's, her husband's hat shop. And this was in, I believe, 1901. When Mrs. Moore came back to Millbrook, before they opened the hat shop, she apprenticed with Madame Rouleau. And Madame Rouleau had a hat shop where the Millbrook florist, or the florist is right here up the street in that brick building. So there was competition going on, which I thought was interesting too. And Mrs. Moore's hat shop was the one that lasted the longest. And maybe Mrs. Rouleau was getting old and tired, so she sort of gave everything to Mrs. Moore. Again, the building was kind of an uninteresting but important late 1890s building. And it had a very beautiful addition that we had on. It was really very tastefully done. I have a photograph here that George Whalen III found in the Whalen archives, looking from here towards Franklin at the destruction of the building. And it's a really sad photograph to look at because, again, another building fell to the wrecking ball just because we needed parking. So again, they paved Paradise and they put up a parking lot. And again, parking lot here is used all the time. And again, the Bank of Millbrook, I believe, bought this lot. Do you know, Peter? I think the Bank of Millbrook bought the lot and decided in 1969 to tear down Mrs. Moore's hat shop and put in a parking lot. Yeah.
I think it was a tribute garden.
Oh, it was a tribute garden, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was a tribute garden. So that was part of the whole thing, yeah.
Did she leave Millbrook after she closed up the shop, or do we know?
Unfortunately, she died the next year. In 1969, she died at the age of 80.
The house and the building were both torn down.
Yeah, I don't know if she actually saw the building being torn down, which I think would have been really traumatic. After being here for 60 years and having a very prosperous building. She was recognized by I guess it was the Millbrook Businessmen's Association or something in 1968 for being here for 60 years. Given a bouquet of flowers, I read, so that was nice. And maybe a plaque. So anyway, there are other buildings in Millbrook that have been torn down, which we're not going to talk about today, but that could be another talk at another time. But I have some questions for you. See what your thoughts are. See, there's some of the questions that I had.
Yeah.
So my first one.
For quite a few years, the building also housed the Millbrook Telephone Exchange.
What, this building?
Yeah.
Really?
In the days for individual private lines, we only had party lines up until like around 1956.
Okay.
Very few private lines. And a lady named Ginny Stranahan.
Hey, where was her answering service?
What's that?
Where was her answering service?
I think it was I remember the sign being to the left of the front of the building. So there must have been a door there. Had rented a room. So when people called in, Ginny would answer and she would find out who you wanted to be connected to. And like on the one ringing ding, two ringing ding. Yeah. She would pull the plugs and connect you. But you could still, if you picked up the line, you might hear a conversation.
Oh yeah.
So you had to hang up before, you could make yours.
You should.
Yeah.
A lot of people did not hang up and just listen to what their neighbors were talking about.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Interesting, I didn't know that. So my first question to all of you is, how do you balance a town or village's need to encourage consumers to come and patronize its businesses with preserving historic structures, right? But still providing additional off-street parking? Were the town fathers, should they have been taken to task for allowing things like this to happen? So any thoughts on that?
Was there a building in that?
No, I think that was part of the, I don't know really.
Well, the Whalen's building, isn't it?
Well, in the Virgin Briggs parking lot, there was a building. Johnny Kading showed us a picture of it. And I always thought it was cool because it had sort of a drive-through.
Oh, really?
I don't know what it was. Maybe, you remember that building, Peter?
No, I don't. I remember
Yeah,
the Sutherland
right there.
house here.
Yeah.
Beautiful Victoria.
Yeah.
Another building to the left of the house?
Because it had a drive-through. Johnny had a picture of it. And I always thought it was a cool building.
Yeah, I think the only building across the street was the Sutherland.
I remember the Sutherlands, but I mean, maybe there was another building there.
Could
There's
someone,
definitely another building at the
Yeah, there was another
other end
house
of the
at the
parking lot.
end.
There was a house that
Yeah.
was torn down.
Yeah, there was another
That
house
could be,
there.
So the straw never used to be here.
No, there was just a house there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, on the 1888 map, it shows the house here, so that predates Mrs. Moore's time. It was just
Yeah.
the house that was here, right? And then it shows, I think, this one as well. So they're two of the older houses on Franklin Avenue, built before a lot of the stuff farther up is built. I'm assuming this is the same one. Like, I don't know, it's weird with the stucco exterior. It looks different, but I'm assuming it's on the same exact footprint as the
Yeah, that probably
1888
was
one, so, like, I'm
just
assuming-
probably was modernized with stucco at some point to make it look Tudor. Probably was a clapboard building in the beginning.
Yeah, the roof line makes it seem
Yeah.
like it's-
I mean, that was a big question. I mean, some towns are a little more sensitive to parking and to preserving historic structures.
Millerton
I mean,
has like no parking.
who?
Millerton.
Yeah, Millerton, right. Millerton, that is kind of an
But it's
issue.
hard to park there.
Yeah, it is hard to park, but their main street is pretty much the main street like it was, which is nice. I mean, Rhinebeck lost a few buildings, but still most of Rhinebeck is still standing, and parking there is parking there, here and there, but
Peter, do you remember, or Jonathan, do you remember where the Stewart's parking lot is? Was there something there? Yeah, like where that big kind of across.
That was the Grand Union.
Oh, it was in the parking lot? It wasn't right up.
The building.
Yeah, yeah.
Stewart.
So that big parking lot was always
I don't know. I
That's a
mean,
big
I always
space.
remember it as a parking lot.
across from the.
But I'm sure there were other buildings that were there, because that building where Stewart's is, or Grand Union, that's obviously not a historic structure. So I mean, you're really curious to know what the buildings were there.
But the Grand Union was definitely thriving in the 60s.
Oh yeah. So that's a big issue. Like I said, especially I think in Millbrook, because not only did we lose the 3 buildings I talked about today, but obviously with our conversation we've lost other buildings too, on other streets, in the center of the town. Again, in the quest of making sure that when you came to shop you had adequate parking and that you would want to come again, because of course everyone wants the convenience of pulling up in front of where they want to go, or close to where they want to go.
Well, of course, remember nowadays, there's just so many more cars
Oh yeah, there are, and that's
than there were
the
back
issue.
then.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the families, if I know right, they only had one car.
At one
Father was the breadwinner, mom stayed home.
Yeah, right. But then that did change a bit, in the 1960s,
Sure.
when life changed a lot in the 1960s.
Oh yeah.
It was common for 2 cars per family. Women began to drive more and more like this, so you needed to have these parking lots, I guess, for parking cars. Anyway, any other questions or thoughts or ideas?
Look, I think part of the problem is that it's always sort of bothering. Back then, no one really thought about the future.
Yeah, well, that's true.
And then the real case in point is not in Millbrook, but it's over in Wassaic, where they stopped the train service north of Dover.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, now you need to go to Wassaic, and that parking lot is always jam-packed.
Oh, yeah.
with cars. So they weren't thinking of it, and they had to rebuild the track and do all. Maybe those buildings could have been used for something else.
Yeah.
Like you say.
I mean, that's the issue today, that there are probably so many other things we could do. And if today someone wanted to tear down a historic building, there would be a big outcry. There would be letter writing and sit-ins, and people would not allow those things to happen. But in Millbrook in the 1960s, it was like, yeah, you know, tear it down, and that's how it's supposed to be, because we're going to be modern, right? But modern is not always the best. Anybody else? Any questions, thoughts, ideas?